My name is Lilian, and I am 28 years old. The scars that crisscross my back tell a story. The story of the night my brother Kevin whipped me with a belt until I collapsed onto the cold basement floor. When I came to, blood sticking to my skin, my mother leaned in and whispered, "Just be grateful we feed you." Today, I work with survivors of abuse, showing them that healing is possible and that justice is stronger than any belt ever could be. If you're listening to this from a place where family is supposed to mean safety, please like and subscribe to follow my journey of discovering that justice is, indeed, stronger than any belt. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, my childhood appeared picture-perfect to any outside observer. After my biological father passed away when I was 4, my mother, Karen, remarried a man named Frank when I was 6. Frank brought his own son, Kevin, into our lives. Kevin was 8 then, only 2 years my senior. We moved into a beautiful 2-story house, complete with a white picket fence and a sprawling backyard that seemed enormous to my young eyes. Frank was a bank manager, always dressed in impeccable suits and carrying a leather briefcase that smelled of important business. My mother stayed home, transforming from a hard-working single mom into a dedicated housewife almost overnight. The first few years felt relatively normal. I remember Christmases with mountains of gifts under a perfectly decorated tree, birthday parties with matching plates and napkins, and weekend trips to the local amusement park where Frank would win stuffed animals for both Kevin and me. My mother seemed happy, always smiling and telling her friends how lucky she was to have found Frank after the tragedy of my father's death. But beneath the glossy surface, small cracks began to form. Signs of trouble I was too young to recognize. Frank had rigid rules for everything. The house had to be spotless upon his arrival. Dinner had to be on the table at precisely 6:30. Kevin and I were expected to maintain perfect grades. My mother had to account for every dollar she spent, presenting receipts for Frank to scrutinize each weekend. "Your stepfather provides for us, Lilian," my mother would say whenever I complained about the strictness. "We need to show our gratitude by keeping things just the way he likes them." As the years passed, I watched Kevin morph from a relatively friendly stepbrother into something else entirely. By the time he was 14, he had adopted many of his father's mannerisms. He walked with the same rigid posture, spoke in the same curt tone, and developed the same expectation that everyone should bend to his will. Frank seemed proud of this transformation, often clapping Kevin on the shoulder and saying things like, "That's my boy, a chip off the old block." When I was 11 and Kevin was 13, I began to feel uneasy whenever I was alone with him. He would glare at me with a barely contained rage if I so much as touched the television remote or sat in what he considered his spot on the sofa. He never laid a hand on me during those early years, but the threat of it always seemed to hang in the air between us. "Stop being so sensitive," my mother would say whenever I tried to voice my unease. "Brothers and sisters always squabble." But this was more than squabbling, and deep down, I think she knew it. I saw it in the way her shoulders would tense whenever Frank criticized Kevin for being too soft on me. I saw it in the forced cheerfulness she used to break up our arguments before Frank could notice. My mother was changing too. The woman who had once fiercely protected me as a single mom became increasingly anxious, desperate to please Frank. She stopped wearing the vibrant colors she had always loved, trading them for the muted tones Frank preferred. She cut her hair short after Frank offhandedly mentioned he liked it that way. She stopped calling her friends from college because Frank deemed them too liberal and a bad influence. I remember one night when I was around 13, I crept downstairs for a glass of water and heard my mother and Frank arguing in the kitchen. I couldn't make out the words, only the harsh, grating whisper of his voice and the soft, pleading tone of hers. The next morning, she wore a long-sleeved shirt, despite the summer heat. When she reached across the table for the cereal box, her sleeve slid up, revealing a dark, ugly bruise on her forearm. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment, and in hers, I saw something I had never seen before, a deep, gut-wrenching shame mingled with fear. I walked into a door last night," she said quickly, yanking her sleeve back down. "So clumsy of me." That was the first time I truly understood that what was happening in our house wasn't normal. It wasn't healthy, and it definitely wasn't safe. But like so many children in abusive homes, I had no words for it and no idea how to escape. All I knew was that something was terribly wrong with the picture-perfect family we showed to the world. By the time Kevin turned 17, his behavior toward me had escalated from cold detachment to active aggression. I was 13, awkward, and just trying to navigate middle school while walking on eggshells at home. Kevin had become Frank's golden boy, excelling in his studies and on the varsity baseball team. His achievements were constantly paraded before family friends as proof of Frank's superior parenting. The first serious incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had my homework spread across the dining room table, working on a science project due the next day. Kevin came home from baseball practice in a foul mood. His team had lost an important game. He glanced at my project, a model of the solar system made from styrofoam balls, and deliberately swept it onto the floor. "This table is for eating, not for your stupid school junk," he snapped, watching as Neptune and Saturn rolled under the china cabinet. "Mom said I could work here," I protested, dropping to my knees to retrieve the scattered planets. Kevin loomed over me, his voice dropping to a hiss. "If you tell Mom or Dad about this, I'll make you regret it. No one will believe you anyway. I'm the good kid, remember?" When I tried to talk to my mother about it later, she brushed off my concerns. "Brothers fight sometimes, Lilian. Kevin's under a lot of pressure with college applications coming up. Just try to stay out of his way when he's stressed." That became my strategy. Avoid Kevin, avoid conflict, make myself invisible. But it was impossible to completely disappear in your own home. Kevin seemed to find reasons to be angry with me. If I took too long in the bathroom in the morning, if I breathed too loudly during family movie night, if I got a slightly better grade than him in English, his one weak subject. Frank began delegating discipline to Kevin whenever he traveled for business. "Kevin's the man of the house when I'm gone," he would announce before leaving. "I expect you ladies to listen to him." My mother would nod obediently, and I would feel a knot form in my stomach, knowing what was to come. The first time Kevin physically hurt me was over something trivial. I had stayed after school for a study group and got home 5 minutes past my curfew. Kevin was waiting at the door, tapping his watch with exaggerated motions. "You're late," he stated flatly. "Only by 5 minutes. The bus was running behind," I explained, trying to squeeze past him toward the stairs. He blocked my path and, without warning, slapped me hard across the face. The shock stunned me more than the pain. "Be on time next time," he said calmly, as if he had just commented on the weather instead of striking his younger sister. I fled to my room, tears streaming down my face, my cheek burning. When my mother got home from her part-time job at the library, I showed her the red mark still visible on my skin. "Oh, honey," she sighed, "you know how important punctuality is in this house. Just try harder to be on time and these things won't happen." Her response hurt more than Kevin's slap. In that moment, I realized I was truly on my own in that house. I once tried to reach out to a teacher, a Mrs. Garcia, who had noticed my withdrawal in class. "Things aren't good at home," I ventured, not brave enough to say more. "Is everything all right with your parents, Lilian?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "It's not my parents," I started, then trailed off. How could I explain that my brother had appointed himself my personal tormentor with my parents' blessing? It sounded unbelievable, even to me. "You can tell me anything," Mrs. Garcia assured me. But when I mentioned Kevin's name, her expression shifted. "Kevin Williams? He's one of our top students. Just yesterday, he was helping with the tutoring program for freshmen." The doubt in her voice was unmistakable. Kevin had cultivated a flawless reputation at school, charming teachers and classmates alike. No one would believe he was capable of cruelty behind closed doors. I developed strategies to survive. I memorized everyone's schedules to minimize my time alone with Kevin. I did chores before I was asked. I studied relentlessly to maintain perfect grades, removing any excuse for discipline. I became an expert at reading facial expressions and body language, sensing when Frank was in a sour mood or when Kevin was looking for an outlet for his frustration. The loneliness was devastating. I had few friends because I was never allowed to visit their homes, and I was too ashamed to invite anyone to mine. What would they think if they saw how I was treated? Who would they tell that might help? Or would they simply stop being my friend, not wanting to be involved in something so uncomfortable? On Kevin's 17th birthday, Frank presented him with an expensive leather belt, handcrafted from Italian leather with a heavy silver buckle. "This is a man's belt," Frank declared proudly as Kevin unwrapped it. "Something of quality that will last for years." Kevin ran his fingers over the smooth leather, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Frank clapped him on the shoulder and added, "Sometimes beautiful things can teach important lessons, too." The way they exchanged a look sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if they shared a secret understanding, one that excluded my mother and me, but somehow involved us all the same. That belt would come to symbolize everything that was wrong in our family dynamic. I didn't know it yet, but when Kevin threaded it through his belt loops the next morning, wearing it to school for the first time, I felt a sense of foreboding that made my hands tremble as I packed my lunch. It was a Friday night in October, unseasonably cold for Denver that time of year. Frank and my mother were at a charity event for his bank, leaving Kevin in charge of the house. At 17, he took this responsibility with a disturbing seriousness, stalking through the kitchen in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, checking his watch every few minutes as if he were managing a corporate office instead of watching his 13-year-old sister. "Mom left lasagna in the fridge," he informed me. "I expect the kitchen to be spotless after you eat." I nodded silently, keeping my eyes downcast as I'd learned to do. Direct eye contact often triggered his anger, interpreted as defiance, rather than normal human interaction. I waited until he went upstairs to get my food, starving after a long day at school where I'd skipped lunch to finish a math assignment. The lasagna was cold in the middle, despite my best efforts to heat it properly. As I carried my plate to the table, my sock snagged on a rough patch of the linoleum. I stumbled, just barely catching my balance, but the plate tilted just enough to send the glass of milk beside it crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass seemed to echo through the entire house. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dropped to my knees, frantically gathering the shards with trembling hands. A bead of blood welled up where a jagged edge had sliced my finger, but I barely noticed. All I could think was, "Clean this up before Kevin comes. Clean this up before Kevin comes." Too late. His footsteps thudded down the stairs, and then he was standing in the doorway, surveying the scene with cold, calculating eyes. "What did you do?" His voice was eerily calm. "It was an accident," I whispered, still kneeling amid the mess. "I'll clean it all up right now." Kevin pulled his phone from his pocket, and my stomach turned to ice. "Dad needs to know about this." "Please," I begged. "It's just a glass. I'll buy a new one with my allowance." He ignored me, already dialing. I could hear the tinny sound of Frank's voice answering, the familiar annoyed tone he used when interrupted at an event. Kevin described the situation as if he were reporting a major disaster, not a broken glass, emphasizing my carelessness and disrespect for family property. I couldn't hear Frank's exact words, but Kevin's expression shifted from self-righteous anger to something darker, more satisfied. "Yes, sir, I understand. I'll take care of it," he said. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his eyes never leaving my face. "Dad says you need to learn a lesson about responsibility and respect." Ice seemed to flood my veins. I knew what that meant in our house. "I already said I'm sorry. It won't happen again," I pleaded. "Get up," Kevin ordered, ignoring my apology. "Go to the basement." The basement. The place where punishments happened because it was soundproofed by thick concrete walls, where Frank had installed a small home gym that no one ever used, except as a place to administer discipline, far from the windows and the neighbors. "Kevin, please," I tried one last time. "It was just an accident." His hand shot out, his fingers clamping around my arm with a force I knew would leave a bruise. "Now, Lilian." He led me down the stairs. flicking on the harsh fluorescent lights that turned the space into an interrogation room. The weight bench sat in the center, a grim throne for what was to come. "Lean over the bench," he instructed, his voice detached, as if he were merely a technician performing a routine procedure. When I hesitated, frozen with fear, he shoved me roughly toward it. "Dad said I should use any means necessary to make sure you learn this lesson." I heard the soft slide of leather as he unbuckled his belt, the same one Frank had gotten for his birthday. The sound sent a jolt of panic through me. Kevin had hit me before with an open hand, once with a wooden spoon, but never with a belt. Never with that belt. "This is for your own good," he said, echoing Frank's favorite phrase, "Count them out loud." The first strike landed across my back with a force that stole my breath. The leather sliced through my thin t-shirt, searing my skin like a brand. "One," I gasped, tears already streaming down my face. The second came faster, harder, landing just below the first. "Two," I choked out. By the fifth, I was sobbing, my knees threatening to buckle. By the eighth, I could feel something warm and wet soaking through my shirt. Blood. He was drawing blood. "Kevin, stop," I begged. "You're hurting me too much." "Weak," he spat. "Just like Mother. No wonder Dad says you'll never amount to anything." The next blow landed with even greater force, as if my pain fueled his strength rather than tempered it. I lost count somewhere around 12, my vision blurring, my consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was Kevin's voice, distant and cold. "Get up. We're not finished." But I couldn't get up. My body had reached its limit, shutting down to protect me from the pain I could no longer endure. I pitched forward onto the bench, the blackness wrapping around me like a mercy. When I came to, I was still in the basement, but my mother was there now, her face pale with shock as she helped me to a sitting position. "What were you thinking, provoking him like that?" she whispered, though I had done nothing to provoke such violence. "Mom," I rasped, my throat raw from crying. "He hurt me. He really hurt me." She glanced nervously up the stairs, checking if Frank or Kevin might be listening. "You know how important this dinner was to your father. Now he had to leave early because of your behavior." I stared at her in disbelief, my back a landscape of pain, the dampness of blood seeping through my shirt. "My behavior?" I asked. "I dropped a glass. It was an accident." Her face hardened in that familiar way, the expression she wore whenever she chose Frank over me. "Why can't you just behave? Be grateful we feed you, give you a roof over your head. Some children have nothing." Those words cut deeper than the belt. Be grateful we feed you, as if providing for your own child was an extraordinary act of charity, not the bare minimum of parental responsibility. She helped me up the stairs, but she didn't offer to clean my wounds or call a doctor. Instead, she retreated to her bedroom where Frank was changing out of his suit, leaving me to stumble to the bathroom alone. I locked the door and slowly, painfully, peeled off my ruined shirt. The mirror revealed what Kevin had done. Angry red welts crisscrossed my back, several of them split open and bleeding. The pattern of the belt's stitching was clearly visible in some places, the skin already darkening to purple around the cuts. As I stood there, staring at the physical evidence of my family's cruelty, something inside me hardened. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't love. This was abuse, plain and simple. And somehow, I had to find a way out before the next time killed me. The next morning, I dressed for school with painstaking care, layering a loose-fitting sweatshirt over a soft cotton t-shirt to avoid irritating the wounds on my back. Every movement was an agony, but I was determined to go. My house had become a prison. School was my only sanctuary. Frank and Kevin had already left for a father-son fishing trip, their absence a temporary reprieve. My mother barely looked at me over breakfast, guilt and shame written in her averted eyes. She didn't ask how I was feeling or offer any medical care. "I packed your lunch," was all she said as I headed out the door. At school, I moved through the morning in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Sitting in the hard plastic chairs was torture. the pressure on my back sending fresh waves of agony with every shift. By fourth period, I was fighting back tears, my concentration shattered. Then came gym class, the one class I couldn't fake my way through, the one class that required changing in front of everyone else. "Lilian," called Miss Thompson, our PE teacher, as I tried to slip past without changing, "you know the rules. Proper gym attire, or it affects your grade." "I don't feel well," I tried, clutching my books to my chest like a shield. "Can I sit this one out?" She studied my face, her eyes taking in the dark circles and the pallor of my skin. "Come to my office for a minute." In her small office off the locker room, Ms. Thompson gestured for me to sit. "This is the third time this month you've asked to sit out. Is everything okay?" Something in her genuine concern broke through the wall I'd built around my emotions. The tears came before I could stop them. "I can't change," I whispered. "My back." Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Are you hurt? Did something happen?" I hesitated, years of family secrecy warring with my desperate need for help. "If I show you, do you promise not to tell anyone?" It was a childish plea, impossible for any responsible adult to honor. Ms. Thompson knelt beside my chair, her voice gentle but firm. "Lilian, if you're hurt, I have to help you. That might mean getting other people involved who can make sure you're safe." In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I turned my back to her and slowly lifted the hem of my sweatshirt, then my t-shirt, revealing what Kevin had done. I heard Ms. Thompson's sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God, Lilian, who did this to you?" "My brother," I admitted, the words feeling alien after so many years of silence. "Last night, because I broke a glass." What followed was a blur of activity. Ms. Thompson immediately took me to the school nurse, who documented my injuries with clinical efficiency, her face grim as she photographed the welts and cuts. The principal was called, then Child Protective Services. A social worker arrived, a woman with a kind voice but direct questions. "Has this happened before? Who else was home when this occurred? Do your parents know about this injury? Do you feel safe going home today?" To that last question, I finally spoke the truth I had been hiding even from myself. "No, I don't feel safe there at all." I was taken to the hospital for a proper medical examination. The doctor, a kind woman with silver hair, cleaned and dressed my wounds, explaining that some might leave permanent scars. "This is not consistent with reasonable discipline," she stated for the record. "This is abuse." The word hung in the sterile air of the exam room. Abuse. A label for what I had endured for years. A validation that what happened in our house was not normal, not okay, not my fault. While I was at the hospital, my parents and Kevin were contacted by the authorities. Their reaction was predictable: denial, minimization, blame shifting. "Lilian has always been prone to exaggeration," Frank told the social worker, according to reports I saw later. "She's going through a difficult phase, acting out for attention." My mother echoed his claims, though witnesses noted she seemed nervous, her eyes constantly flicking to Frank for approval. "We've always been a loving family. I can't imagine how this happened." Kevin, coached by Frank, presented himself as the responsible older brother, reluctantly tasked with reasonable discipline. "She was being disrespectful and destructive," he claimed. "I only gave her a light punishment, like my father asked. She must have hurt herself more afterward to make it look worse." And did he demonstrate how it was to be used for discipline? The question hung in the air for a long moment. Kevin's eyes again sought out his father's. Whatever he saw there must have unnerved him, because he faltered, visibly uncertain. "Kevin," the prosecutor pressed, "has your father ever used this belt, or any other, to discipline you?" "Objection," Frank's lawyer stood. "Relevance." "Goes to the pattern of behavior and household dynamics, Your Honor," the prosecutor countered. "Overruled," the judge decided. "The witness will answer." Kevin seemed to deflate, his rehearsed answers no longer sufficient. "Yes," he finally admitted. "My father believed in strict discipline." "Did he ever strike you hard enough to draw blood?" Another long pause. Sometimes, accidents happen during discipline. Did your father instruct you to discipline Lilian in the same way he disciplined you? He said I should make sure she learned respect, Kevin answered, his voice barely a whisper. He said that sometimes pain is the only teacher that works. A murmur went through the courtroom. Frank's jaw was clenched tight. My mother covered her face with her hands. The most stunning testimony came from my mother. Called by the prosecution, she walked to the stand with small, shuffling steps, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When she took the oath, her voice was so faint the clerk had to ask her to repeat it. At first, she stuck to the family narrative, claiming she had no idea of the severity of what happened until she found me in the basement. "And what did you do when you found your daughter unconscious and bleeding?" the prosecutor asked. I helped her upstairs," my mother replied. "Did you seek medical attention for her?" "No." "Why not?" My mother glanced at Frank, then down at her own hands, which were twisting in her lap. Frank said it wasn't necessary. "Mrs. Williams," the prosecutor continued gently, "has Frank ever used physical discipline on you?" Frank's lawyer objected immediately, but was again overruled. My mother was silent for so long I thought she would refuse to answer. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "For the record, Mrs. Williams, has your husband physically assaulted you?" "Yes," she said. The words seemed to cost her everything. "For how long?" "Since the first year of our marriage." Her voice grew a little stronger. 8 years. "Were you afraid of what might happen if you sought help for Lilian after this incident?" "Yes." Tears streamed down her cheeks now. "Frank said it would destroy our family, that Kevin would lose his chance at college, that I would lose everything." "So you told your injured daughter to be grateful she was being fed?" My mother finally looked up then, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. "I was wrong," she said, her voice clear. "I was so terribly wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." The judge called for a short recess after my mother's testimony. When the trial resumed, Frank took the stand. His demeanor was still controlled, but now it was tinged with desperation. He denied ordering Kevin to beat me severely, claimed any injuries were unintentional, and tried to paint himself as a stern but loving father. But the evidence was too loud, too undeniable. The medical records, the testimony from the school staff, Kevin's admissions about Frank's disciplinary methods, and finally, my mother's confirmation of abuse. It all built a case his flimsy denials could not dismantle. When the judge delivered her ruling, her voice was stern, laced with a barely contained anger. The evidence in this case reveals not just a single incident of excessive punishment, but a family system where violence was systematically used to control and intimidate. She ordered Kevin to be placed in a juvenile detention facility with mandatory therapy, a remarkably severe consequence for a first-time offender with his academic record. Frank was charged with child abuse and domestic battery, with criminal proceedings to follow in adult court. My mother was ordered to attend parenting classes and therapy, with supervised visitation to be reevaluated after 6 months. Most importantly for me, I was to remain in temporary foster care, with a permanent placement to be arranged, pending further evaluation. As the bailiff led Kevin away, he looked back at me once. In his eyes, I saw confusion, and the first flicker of something that might, with time and therapy, become remorse. Frank stared straight ahead, his perfect facade finally shattered, and my mother, after a whispered conversation with her newly appointed lawyer, approached Sarah and asked if she could speak to me privately at some point. "That will be up to Lilian," Sarah replied, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. The medical evidence told a story my silence could not. The pattern of injuries was consistent with repeated blows from a belt, delivered with considerable force. The doctor estimated it would have taken at least 15 to 20 strikes to cause such damage. That night, instead of returning to the house with the white picket fence, I was placed with a temporary foster family. The Johnsons were experienced foster parents who specialized in emergency placements. Their home was modest but warm, with clear rules posted on the refrigerator and soft blankets on every sofa. "You're safe here," Mrs. Johnson assured me, leading me to a small room with pale blue walls. "No one is going to hurt you in this house." It was the first time in years that I fell asleep without a knot of dread in my stomach. The legal process moved slowly. I was assigned a guardian ad litem named Sarah, a lawyer whose sole job was to represent my best interests in court. She patiently explained every step, answering all my questions and calming my fears. "Will I have to see them in court?" I asked during one of our meetings. "Unfortunately, yes," Sarah admitted. "But I will be right beside you, and you will be completely safe." Frank hired an expensive lawyer who specialized in family law. They fought the emergency custody order fiercely, presenting character witnesses who testified to what a pillar of the community Frank was, how Kevin was an exemplary student headed for an Ivy League university, and how my mother volunteered at the church. The pressure to retract my story was immense. I received calls from relatives I barely knew, pleading with me to stop destroying the family. Letters arrived from church members suggesting I had misinterpreted what happened. Frank's lawyer built a narrative of me as a troubled teenager, making false accusations for attention. There were moments I almost gave in. The weight of facing my entire family, of being painted as a liar and a troublemaker, felt unbearable. But then I would see my back in the mirror, the healing wounds that would become permanent scars, and my determination would harden. Miss Thompson, my gym teacher, visited me at the Johnsons' house, bringing homework and updates from school. "I'm so proud of you," she told me. "What you're doing takes incredible courage." As the court date approached, my nightmares intensified. I would wake up gasping for air, feeling a phantom belt striking my back. Mrs. Johnson would bring me warm milk and sit with me until I could sleep again, never rushing me, never asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. The day before we were due in court, Sarah called with unexpected news. "The prosecutor wants to amend the charges to include your stepfather," she explained. "Based on your brother's history and the severity of your injuries, they believe Frank directed this abuse and should be held equally accountable." It was the first time I allowed myself to hope that real justice was possible, that the court might see through the perfect family facade to the darkness that had nearly destroyed me. The juvenile courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, nothing like the grand chambers shown in movies. Wood paneling gave the room a solemn feel, the state seal hanging prominently behind the judge's bench. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet space, the scratch of pens on notepads, the rustle of documents, the soft creak of chairs. I sat beside Sarah, trying to keep my breathing steady as she had taught me. "Don't look at them until you have to," she advised. "Focus on the judge or on me." But I couldn't resist a quick glance to my right where Frank, my mother, and Kevin sat with their lawyer. Frank looked as impeccable as ever, his suit pressed, his expression controlled. My mother seemed smaller somehow, her shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to disappear. And Kevin, wearing a navy blazer that made him look older than 17, stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. When it was my turn to testify, Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly. I took the oath, a promise to both the court and myself. The prosecutor gently guided me through my testimony, starting with the night of the beating. "And what did your mother say when she found you?" she asked. "She told me to be grateful they gave me food," I answered, my voice surprisingly steady. "She said, 'Some children have nothing.'" A soft murmur went through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge. When Frank's lawyer cross-examined me, his approach was calculated to undermine my credibility. He brought up minor disciplinary issues from school, times I had talked back to teachers. He questioned why I hadn't reported earlier incidents, insinuating I was fabricating a pattern of abuse. "Isn't it true," he suggested, "that you were angry about being disciplined for breaking a house rule and you exaggerated what happened to get attention?" "No," I replied, looking directly at him. "I dropped a glass by accident. My brother beat me with a belt until I was unconscious. Those are the facts." Other witnesses followed. Miss Thompson testified about discovering my injuries, her voice catching slightly. The school nurse and the hospital doctor presented the medical evidence, their clinical descriptions somehow more damning than any emotional testimony. The doctor clicked through photos of my back, displayed on a screen for the judge and lawyers. These injuries, the doctor stated, are consistent with repeated blows from a narrow, rigid object, such as a belt. The force required would be far beyond what could be considered reasonable corporal punishment. Several lacerations required medical adhesive to close, and some will leave permanent scars. As the images appeared on the screen, the courtroom fell completely silent. Even Frank's lawyers stopped taking notes. I didn't need to see the photos. I had lived the reality they documented. Instead, I watched the faces of those who saw them for the first time, the shock, the disbelief, the horror. The final witness was the social worker who had interviewed Kevin. She reported that while initially defensive, he had made a disturbing statement. When questioned about the severity of the assault, she testified, Kevin stated, and I quote, "She needs to learn respect, just like I did." Kevin's confidence on the stand, the confidence of someone who had always been believed, began to crumble under the prosecutor's methodical questioning. "Did you strike your sister with a belt on the night in question?" she asked. "I administered appropriate discipline as my father instructed," Kevin recited, using the rehearsed language his lawyer had clearly provided. "How many times did you strike her?" Kevin hesitated. "I don't remember the exact number." "More than 5 times? Possibly. More than 10? Another long pause. I didn't respond right away when the verdict was read. I was too shaken by what had just happened, by the public acknowledgement of what I had suffered, by the confirmation that I was not wrong, not weak, not deserving of abuse. Justice had finally spoken, and its voice was louder than my fear. 2 weeks after the hearing, I moved from the Johnsons' emergency placement to a more permanent foster home. The Williams family, no relation to my former family, a coincidence that initially unsettled me, had been caring for children for over 15 years. They lived in a modest 4-bedroom house about 30 minutes from my school, allowing me to continue my studies without interruption. Carol and Robert Williams were in their 50s, with grown children of their own and a seemingly endless reserve of patience. Their home ran on clear but gentle principles: respect for privacy, open communication, and natural consequences instead of punishment. The first time I accidentally broke a mug while washing dishes, I had a panic attack, certain that some form of retribution was coming. "Lilian," Carol said, kneeling beside me as I frantically tried to gather the ceramic shards with trembling hands. "Accidents happen. They happen to everyone. Nobody gets hurt for accidents in this house." It took weeks before I truly believed her, before I stopped flinching at sudden movements or constantly apologizing for tiny infractions of rules that existed only in my mind. The welts and cuts on my back slowly faded into scars, pink lines that would eventually turn silver. The wounds to my sense of safety and trust took longer to heal. Twice a week, I had therapy sessions with Dr. Rivera, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. At first, I was silent, unwilling to revisit the pain I had just escaped. "We can just sit here," Dr. Rivera offered during our 3rd session, after 30 minutes of my stubborn silence. "There's no rush. Healing happens on your time, not mine." Something in her lack of pressure cracked my resolve. "Do you know what it's like," I finally asked, "to be afraid in your own home? To calculate every word, every move, because the wrong one could trigger violence?" "I don't know personally," she answered honestly, "but I've worked with many young people who do. And I believe you." Those 3 words, "I believe you," became a lifeline. After years of having my reality denied, being believed was revolutionary. Gradually, I began to share more: the constant anxiety, the hypervigilance, the nightmares that still haunted me. Dr. Rivera taught me coping mechanisms, grounding techniques to pull me back to the present, breathing exercises to calm my racing heart. School became a sanctuary. Free from the constant stress at home, I discovered a genuine love for learning. My grades improved from above average to exceptional. My English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, noticed my talent for writing and encouraged me to join the school's literary magazine. "You have a powerful voice, Lilian," she said. "Your words can help others who feel voiceless." The Williamses expanded my understanding of what a family could be. Dinner wasn't a tense performance of perfection, but a relaxed gathering where everyone talked about their day. Disagreements happened, but they were resolved through conversation, not intimidation. "Healthy conflict is normal," Carol explained, noticing my anxiety during one such discussion. "What matters is how we handle it." 6 months after my placement with the Williamses, my social worker brought news about Kevin. He was in an intensive therapy program at the Juvenile Detention Center, addressing not only his behavior toward me, but also the abuse he himself had suffered. "He's asked if you would consider receiving a letter from him," the social worker explained. "You are under no obligation to agree." I considered the request carefully, discussing it with Dr. Rivera and the Williamses. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Carol one evening. "I can't tell you what to do," she said, "but I can promise that whatever you decide, we will support you. Your healing comes first." After 2 weeks of deliberation, I agreed to receive Kevin's letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, 3 pages of careful, handwritten script. He didn't apologize for what he had done, but he did explain the cycle of violence that had shaped him. Frank had begun disciplining him at the age of 8, using methods that grew harsher as Kevin grew older. By the time I came into the picture, Kevin had been conditioned to believe that violence was a normal, even necessary, part of a proper upbringing. "I'm not writing this to justify what I did," the letter concluded. "Nothing could ever justify hurting you like that. I'm writing because I want you to know I'm working to break the cycle. I will never hurt anyone like that again. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope one day you find peace." I didn't reply right away. The letter stirred a complex mix of emotions in me. Still anger, yes, but also a nascent understanding of how Kevin had been forged in the same toxic fire that had nearly consumed me. News of my mother came through more official channels. She had filed for divorce from Frank, moved into a small apartment, and was diligently attending individual therapy and parenting classes. Our supervised visits began awkwardly, both of us unsure how to interact without Frank's oppressive presence editing our roles. "I failed you," she said during our 3rd visit, finally broaching the subject that hung between us. "I was supposed to protect you, and instead, I became part of what hurt you." "Why did you stay?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. "Why did you let it happen to us?" She had no simple answer, only the tangled reality of fear, financial dependence, eroded self-worth, and the insidious way abuse escalates so gradually that each new level becomes the new normal. "I thought I was keeping things from getting worse," she explained, her voice trembling. "I believed if I could just be perfect enough, do everything right, he wouldn't get angry. When that didn't work, I thought if I could at least direct his rage toward me instead of you kids, I was doing my job as a mother." She wiped at her tears. "I was wrong. So terribly wrong." Forgiveness did not come quickly or easily. It emerged in small moments, over months of counseling, as I watched my mother reclaim her identity and own her failures without excuse. She didn't demand forgiveness or rush my healing to soothe her own guilt. She simply showed up, consistently, demonstrating through actions, not words, that she was committed to change. At the end of 8th grade, I received an award for academic achievement. As I looked out from the stage after accepting it, I saw Carol and Robert Williams cheering enthusiastically on one side of the auditorium, and a few rows behind them, sitting quietly but smiling with unmistakable pride, was my mother. That summer, just before starting high school, I made a decision that surprised even myself. With Dr. Rivera's guidance and the Williamses' full support, I asked if I could visit Kevin at the Juvenile Detention Center. The meeting was arranged with counselors present in a neutral room, with comfortable chairs and windows overlooking a small garden. Kevin had changed. His athletic build had thinned, and his expression was stripped of its former arrogance. When I walked in, he stood, but made no move toward me, respecting the boundaries we'd established. He looked older than his years. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. We talked for 45 minutes, not about the past, but about the present. His therapy, my new home, the books we were reading, his plans to finish high school. Near the end, he asked the question I could tell had been tormenting him. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered my answer carefully. "I'm working on it," I replied honestly. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to hatred takes too much energy I need for my own healing." He nodded, accepting that partial answer as more than he had a right to expect. As I prepared to leave, he said one more thing. "I'm proud of you, William, for being stronger than all of us." High school began with a fresh start. Few of my new classmates knew my history, and those who did respected my privacy. I joined the debate team and discovered a talent for articulating arguments with clarity and persuasion. My English teacher encouraged me to consider a future in law or psychology, fields where I could help others who had navigated traumas of their own. The Williamses formally asked me to stay with them through graduation, an offer I accepted with gratitude and relief. While my mother continued to improve and our relationship slowly mended, we both recognized that the stability of my foster placement was vital for my continued progress. On my 16th birthday, Carol and Robert gave me a journal bound in soft leather, a stark contrast to the belt that had once scarred me. Inside the cover, Carol had written, "Your story matters, all of it, the pain and the healing. One day, it may light the way for someone else lost in the dark." That night, I began to write my full story for the first time. Not just the trauma, but the recovery, the rebuilding of a life I had thought was permanently broken. With every page, I reclaimed a piece of my narrative from those who had tried to silence me. 15 years have passed since the night my brother beat me with a belt until I lost consciousness. I am 28 now, with a master's degree in psychology and a career as a counselor for survivors of family violence. The scars on my back have faded to thin, silvery lines, visible only if you know to look for them. The emotional scars have softened too, though certain triggers can still, for a fleeting moment, pull me back to that basement. My office is intentionally designed to be a safe space. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs. No weight benches or equipment that might remind clients of places where they were hurt. On my desk sits a small sculpture of a phoenix rising from the ashes, a gift from the Williamses when I graduated from college. "Where did you find the strength?" my clients often ask. "How did you move forward?" The answer is both simple and complex. I moved forward because standing still wasn't an option. I found strength because the alternative was to surrender to a narrative written by my abusers. But I didn't do it alone. Every step of my journey was supported by others who believed in my worth when I couldn't see it myself. Miss Thompson, the PE teacher who noticed what others missed and acted instead of looking away. The Johnsons and then the Williamses, who showed me what a family was supposed to be. Dr. Rivera, who guided me through the labyrinth of trauma with unwavering patience. And Sarah, the court-appointed advocate who fought for my rights. These people formed a safety net that caught me when I fell and a ladder that helped me climb toward healing. My mother and I have built a new relationship, one founded on honesty instead of fear. She remained in therapy, maintained sobriety after a brief turn to alcohol during the divorce, and eventually became an advocate for domestic violence awareness, speaking to women's groups about recognizing the warning signs she had once ignored. "I can't change what happened," she told me once, "but I can help make sure it doesn't happen to someone else's child." Frank served 4 years in prison for child abuse and domestic battery. Upon his release, he moved to another state. We have had no contact, a boundary I set and have maintained. Some wounds are best healed by distance. Kevin's path has been more complicated. After 3 years in juvenile detention with intensive therapy, he earned his high school diploma and later a degree in social work. Today, he works with at-risk youth, particularly boys showing early signs of violent behavior. We communicate occasionally by email and have met in person a few times. Our relationship will never be typical, but it has evolved into something neither of us could have imagined in those dark years. "The belt left scars on both of us," he said during our last meeting. "Just different kinds." The most powerful lesson I have learned is that cycles can be broken. The violence that shaped my childhood did not have to define my future. I made a conscious choice to end the pattern, to build a life based on compassion instead of control, on communication instead of fear. This doesn't mean forgetting what happened. In fact, remembering is crucial. My experiences inform my work every day, allowing me to connect with a pain in others that might otherwise remain hidden. But to remember without being consumed by the memory, that is a delicate balance, one I work on daily. Sometimes I think back to that moment in the courtroom when the evidence of my injuries was displayed, the silence that fell as people confronted the truth of what had been done to a child in the name of discipline. That silence was a collective acknowledgement that this was wrong, unequivocally, undeniably wrong. Justice, in that moment, struck harder than any belt, not through vengeance, but through truth acknowledged, harm recognized, and healing made possible. The system that so often fails vulnerable children worked for me, largely because people like Miss Thompson and Sarah refused to look away. For those of you listening who may recognize your own story and mine, please know you are not alone. The cycle of abuse thrives in silence and isolation. Breaking that silence is terrifying, but it is necessary. Reach out to a teacher, a counselor, a friend's parent, anyone who can help. You deserve safety. You deserve care. You deserve justice. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against family abuse? What would you do if you suspected a child was being harmed? Your comments can help raise awareness and save lives. Like this video if it moved you. Subscribe to support more stories of survival, and share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible. Remember, in the fight against domestic violence, your voice matters too. Thank you for witnessing my journey. May it give you strength for yours.